Good afternoon, welcome. Thank you all for being here. We're very excited as Environmental Studies 200 to be here at the site of TRICA with the founder, John Swarthout, and executive director?
No, operations manager.
Operations manager. Sorry, Rebecca Weeks. We're going to do a tour and a question and answer session with these guys on the site and try and take in all of the different changes and all of the different environmental challenges and environmental promises that this site has. So, John, if you want to tell us a little bit about your vision for the place and how this sort of became a brownfield site, and maybe give us a tour as we do that, that would be wonderful.
So this building itself, the history started back in 1907 and was designed by Charles Hummel, the same guy that did like the Capitol building and the train depot, and also St. John's Cathedral up here. In fact, some of the plans, we were able to find the original blueprints, and some of the design elements that were going to be in here, 1907, were dropped, and you see that they ended up at St. John's Cathedral in 1910. Like, for instance, there's a round window above the big arched windows, and they have that at St. John's, the exact same design that was in the blueprints. Anyways, it was the United Methodist, or Emmanuel Methodist Episcopal Church from 1907 up until the 1960s. At that time, the Cathedral of the Rockies was built, also Methodist. Everyone that was here left and went there because it was like the new Methodist church. They had a really charismatic minister, and that's when, well, even prior to then, it wasn't in the best shape. It needed kind of to be remodeled even then. What happened is it was like deconsecrated and sold to a man who was then, his vision was to turn it into a bunch of apartments. He gutted it from any church-like things and put in, well, pulled out corner elements. You see that diagonal door there and how it goes all the way up? There was one of those diagonals in each of these corners. You can still see the remnants of it in some of the corners, like right here, for instance. This is the original floor. This is that diagonal. You can see here there were two doors, even the hole where they would lock the other door, and it would continue. So in each corner, he pulled those out. Should never have happened. The roof started to sink. It started to push the walls out. He did put two floors in here and a bunch of framing which kind of held it together like a Band-Aid, but the damage was already done. And anyways, then walked away from it. So that's how it was left. Then it fell into the hands in the 1980s, which is where then the drug use happened. So Methodist to meth. Wasn't quite the, bringing back part of it. But anyways, then it was, I mean, there were two apartments then built over here, not the best apartments. It was deemed one of the entire state of Idaho's 10 most threatened and endangered historic sites in the whole state by Preservation Idaho. There was a big chain link fence around it. There were broken stained glass windows. It was just, if anyone remembers, it was like a haunt. It had the name, the Crack House Church. It wasn't any secret. People were like, there's devil worshiper things that go on. It was, it was a scary place. Anyways, but it was obvious to see it could become something really wonderful. I live in the neighborhood. I'd always drive by, think, wouldn't that be great? The program, TRICA, which is founded on the belief that the arts have a very unique and profound power to inspire the hell out of children. We don't say that in our missions. I can say it to you guys. I always thought, what an amazing place this would be to have a home. And so I was driving by one day. There was a guy coming up a stairwell that was right there at the time with a stove. Bringing it up. They use stoves, they cook now. So I don't know, but it was the stove. And I was like, now's our chance. Stop the car. What? Stop the guy. What's up with this place? He ended up bringing us right in here, up the stairwell, up the, giving us a tour, the whole thing, everywhere. There's a basement. Anyways, that's where I said, well, this place would make a great center for children's arts. He said, why don't you buy it? And that's when it began a 2-year process of trying to convince him to sell it to us. He said, write up a proposal, bring it back. I did that. He said, now you've inspired me to do something with it. Then he said, what if I sell you half of it? What if I rent you just this part? Eventually, 2 years later, after saying, I'm never going to sell it, but keep coming by, he said, I'll sell it. So we got everything lined up, and he sold it to Trika, and that's when the effort began. We had a board member at the time who knew of the Brownfields program, Keith Donahue. And he, because of the meth residue, he thought this could be something that we could apply for and get into that program. And so he kind of led us through that, and we ended up getting it. And when everything was said and done, the abatement, I believe, was about $660,000 total, which, and this is where I probably should hand it over to Aaron Schaff, because he really is the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, and he kind of led us through it from there. So Aaron?
Yeah, so actually John's right. It's a little more nuanced than that, given the age of the building. And hi, everybody, I'm Aaron. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for inviting me.
Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, so just a little bit about me first before we get going. I'm the regional administrator of the Boise office of DEQ. So 10 counties, southwest counties, we basically do all the DEQ stuff across the whole state, but in those counties. And so I'm currently the administrator of that office. Started out didn't start out in DEQ Brownfields, but when John and I first met, I was basically running the program statewide. And so I'm looking at this structure, I'm like, well, given the age, they're gonna have lead-based paint, right? Definitely gonna be lead-based paint. So we're gonna put kids in there, can't have lead, there's no safe level of lead for kids. So obviously we're gonna have to get rid of that, we're gonna need to do a lead abatement. You didn't even have to test for it, we knew we'd find some. We're certainly convinced that there was gonna be a bunch of asbestos in here as well. There's a bunch of popcorn, insulation, and this building's freaking me out right now. Yeah, it seems a lot bigger and a lot smaller all at the same time. This thing was like this crazy, like methed out rat maze with partially constructed, just framed out apartments and stuff, and colored on. That window over there was like colored and spray painted on, and just
and the hot tub.
Total random hot tub over there with a glass ceiling and warped floors, and I haven't been in here since the new roof's been on, and it looks good. Anyway, so figured that lead and asbestos was pretty much going to drive the show, and we're like, okay, meth gets us the hook to come in here and start spending federal dollars on this place because methamphetamine was actually included in the Small Business Liability Relief Act, which is long for Brownfields. So the Brownfields law in 2002 that was signed into law by then President George W. Bush set this program up. And it has all kinds of crazy, hooks to it and things you can do, things you can't do. So what we were trying to do is find some type of hazardous substance. Hazardous substances made it easiest for us to come in here and do some work. So we did what's called a phase 1 assessment. Have you guys learned about phase 1s? Okay. Good.
They read the one for this.
You read it, very good.
Yes.
All right, so we were able to commission that through one of our private contractors that DEQ has under contract, and they're actually still under contract with us. But got the phase 1 done, and they came up with this police report, which is a pretty entertaining read. With that, did you guys read that in the appendices too of the phase 1?
I didn't give you the appendices. That's 80 more pages.
Oh, man,
I'll make
that's
it
the best
accessible.
part. Anyway, phase 1s are pretty dry. They're pretty cookbooky. If you end up in consulting, you're going to be doing them, and you want to try to get out of those as quickly as possible. But it's just something you do. I did them too. Anyway, so we did the phase 1, identified, yeah, there's meth, yeah, there's probably lead, asbestos, maybe, and then hired them to come in and do some second round testing. A little bit of asbestos, but not much. Most of it had probably been abated by the guy who was trying to do stuff, and I would imagine he probably didn't abate it correctly. Nevertheless, no asbestos, so that wasn't a driver. Lead-based paint around some of the trim, specifically on the outside, was a bit of an issue. And that actually helped us with the windows, because that was a whole other thing. So I don't know if you've ever heard of National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106. But if you get involved in renovating structures ever, or work in projects that involve that, you will hear a lot about that. And John got to learn a bit about it, and it was a little bit of a nightmare, because this building was eligible for the National Historic Register, right? And so it had these stained glass windows. It was a type of stained glass that is not being done anymore. It was kind of a little bit rare. It was, people weren't, obviously rocks had gone through it. I think there had been some weird burn spots even, like someone tried to melt it with a torch lighter. I don't know. So we were able to use the fact that there was lead present to sort of drive, well, no, these windows got to come out because we got to do the cleanup. How are you going to clean up rotten trim without windows falling out, right? So John, I think you had to hire a photographer or somebody came in. Anyway, you had to come in, take a whole bunch of pictures inside and out, very specific formatting too, right? It's not like you just come up with your smartphone and snap a picture and say, okay, these windows are documented. No, the State Historic Preservation Office has very, very specific mitigation stipulations for, okay, the windows are going to come out, so you got to document exactly how they were, because they're just assuming that they're never going back in again. That may or may not be correct. I don't know. Very expensive to get those things redone, though. So that helped to drive, the ability to get that cleaned up, and those windows came out. We're using all these little bits and pieces to check all these various regulatory boxes. All right, the noodle bowl of regulations involved in this project is astonishing. It's just astonishing. The environmental stuff wasn't that complicated. In fact, the environmental stuff was a bit of a boon to John and Trika, because it sort of created the need to remove all of that crummy infrastructure that the dude who was trying to develop apartments had put in. All that stuff had to come out.
Right.
It's going to cost a lot of money to do that demo. Oh, look, it's all contaminated with meth. And not just mildly contaminated. The worst numbers I have seen in Idaho. That's not to say that I've seen all the numbers in Idaho. I haven't. I don't work for health and welfare. There actually is a registry for residential housing units that were used as meth labs or had busted and there's been meth, and you've got to get it cleaned up to what the standard is. The standard is a technical standard. It's not necessarily health-based, and you'll see that a lot with certain contaminants. We don't really know what to do with them in the regulated community. We say, well, we can measure it at this, at this part per million or part per billion. So that's what it gets cleaned up to. It gets cleaned up to whatever the labs can measure to. That doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen, and that's what happened with meth, and that's how this state wrote rules around meth. Those rules, by the way, don't apply to hotel rooms or really motel rooms, which would be the greater concern. And there was a lot of meth getting cooked in the early 2000s in motel rooms. And of course, they share HVAC units, so of course the whole place is contaminated. But those aren't included in the rules. Interesting story there. Sorry, I go on outside tangents a lot.
And
I'm doing this
was
for a while.
it true, Aaron, that everywhere they tested here, like from the lowest to like the highest, every single one came back?
Yeah. We did not find meth. Okay, we found meth above the standard everywhere they measured it. There were little squares all over this place. It looked like someone took little Polaroids and put them all over, because it's what you do, basically like a Polaroid frame. This is where we did our wipe sample. I don't even remember how many dozens and dozens of samples there were. It was ridiculous though. But we came back with numbers in like 60,000 range, and the baseline is 1. And I can't remember what the unit is for meth, because it's something weird. It's something per square inch or millimeter or something like that. It's a weird standard you won't find anywhere else. So we used the meth contamination as a way to drive the cleanup, but also to take out all of the stuff that John needed gone to make this project work. So that helped out a lot. And then, of course, we dealt with the lead out here, and the workers were really good about it. There's lead-safe work practices that have to be you have to go through all of those steps, especially if you're using federal money, which John was. You got a sub-grant at one point, which also meant that you had to pay your contractors Davis-Bacon wages. Again, if you get involved in spending federal money, these are things you're going to have to pay attention to. Davis-Bacon wages in Idaho can really kill a project. If you're forced to pay those wages, you're basically paying people 2 to 3 times what you would normally have to pay them, just in the standard market. So imagine you're paying an equipment operator $10, $15 an hour to operate some equipment. All of a sudden, now you're paying them $45. Okay, so that's expensive, but that was all done primarily through a sub-grant. But yeah, so we were just cobbling together all these different pieces of money from the federal government, from our program in the state. And then John was actually able to take advantage of a limited pilot program. It was called the Community Reinvestment Pilot Act, passed by the legislature in 2000. I think it was passed in 2007, but not funded until 2008. They set aside $1.5 million to address 10 properties across Idaho. They were all supposed to be rural, so we snuck this one in. Rural in scope, and I think that's how we slipped that past the legislature, right? Just thinking about it politically. But basically what it did was it created a fund where 10 projects could be eligible for a rebate of up to $150,000 per project if they completed a cleanup certified by the state. So that means you spend, I think it was a 75% rebate, So you spend, you know, $200,000, you get $150,000 back, essentially. And we had to go through and make sure all of those expenditures were legit. We had to do that for your loan and your sub-grant too. So a lot of paperwork oversight for DEQ and our partners to do what is really a pretty basic and simple cleanup. But the story of this place is not really the cleanup and the contamination. I think the bigger story here, frankly, from a community and a government standpoint and just getting a project done is all the little pieces that were involved in this. Right off the top of my head, there are at least 6 government agencies involved. A couple of quasi-governmental agencies, obviously you're a nonprofit board, a huge community outreach thing. This project wouldn't have gotten done without the community effort, not just money, but just in kind. People coming and doing stuff, about $1 million worth or something close to that.
Well, so to date, including brownfields and all that, it's basically about 5.2 million.
Hoodie.
With approximately 2,700 individual donors, businesses, foundations, organizations, many of whom have donated and helped more than once.
Right, right. Yeah, Erstat, how many times have they been in here?
Right.
Yeah, Alta,
Continued.
Graphics, yeah.
Exactly.
So it sounds like one of the really interesting themes is collaboration across governments, across sort of interests. Could you talk a little bit more about what drove this collaboration, or why there was interest in this project in particular, or in this kind of moment in time, or this place that helped with that?
I'm going to take first swing at that, if you don't mind. But before we go there, I also want to talk about public involvement, okay? Because we were talking about the community coming in and not only money, but a lot of in-kind services. What got it off the ground initially was people coming in here and emptying out, which was basically the refuse of the main auction. So if any of you have ever been down to the main auction, when they're done selling stuff, there's kind of junk goes to the end. And that's what looked like this place was filled up with, like, the stuff that didn't sell at main auction. Plus the go-kart track downstairs, and engines and bikes and everything. Not bicycles, motorcycles, and go-karts and stuff downstairs.
Beds that didn't work.
Yeah. So the
Should
public
we take a tour down to the
public involvement piece is huge, but to paint the robust picture, there were some people who were not in favor of this project. There were some neighbors who were really kind of bummed out about the concept of potentially traffic coming here. You know, they had this church, it was a quiet neighbor, nothing was really going on, so they were okay with it. Now there's going to be kids running around. So there were some people that were not for the project. They were fairly vocal. When you spend government funds on a project, you have a lot of times public comment periods, and so we did have a 30-day public comment period on the cleanup here, and some of those folks weighed in with non-substantive comments. It didn't have anything to do with the cleanup, but largely it was like, this project sucks and I don't want to deal with traffic. I mean, that's kind of what it broke down to. And the irony is that some of the major folks who were against it were actually artists, which is shocking to me. So the irony was murdered there a little bit. But they did have some legitimate concerns about the cleanup. You're cleaning up meth. That's going to go into the air. That's going to contaminate our kids. You're cleaning up lead, and some of it's outside. That's going to, that's going to contaminate our kids. And of course, the answer is, well, if we don't do that and this whole place falls over, then what's going to happen? You're going to have an uncontrolled release, right? So we were managing public expectations a lot. And so, and then I'm sorry, your question was,
why collaborate?
Why collaborate? Couldn't have gotten done without it. First of all, nobody other than this gentleman right here was ever going to get this project done. He's a little bit of a lunatic, and in the nicest sense of the term. Probably thought those 2 years acquiring the place were the hardest 2 years he was ever going to spend, and then of course the next 2 years were harder than that, the next 2 years were harder than that giant project. This guy's an emotional and mental giant. I couldn't do it. A private citizen wasn't going to get this done, unless they were like some trust fund baby and just, set $100 bills on fire every 2 seconds. Nobody was going to, this would not pencil for a private for-profit entity. Government wasn't going to come in here either, because they don't have the kind of funds to come in and do something like this to, sort of what end. There's really, the ROI, the return on investment, is small and long. So a nonprofit was really the only way to get it done, and John was a relatively newish nonprofit, good roots in the community, good support, but not necessarily deep pockets from financing. So when you're looking to get stuff done with other people's money, collaboration is critical. So John, I'll let you take that part of it because you're the master.
Thank you, Aaron. And I want them to see downstairs. Can I talk as we go downstairs? Because I know we're somewhat limited on time. But what Aaron was saying, in other words, like a developer would have looked at this project and thought, okay, it's going to take $7 million to get it fixed up and into something and get occupancy. And even when I put all that money into it, it's only going to be worth, I mean, things have changed, but let's say at the top, maybe $3.5 million, so it never would have worked. But as a nonprofit, people are looking for a different type of investment, and therein really is kind of the answer. Right now, Boise is the fastest growing city in the community. In the Union. The whole United States, Forbes magazine, you see new construction everywhere. And this is saving a historic site. It's not new construction. And that in of itself is really important for you, college-age students, for children who we serve, ages 2 to 12. It's a special place. It's not going to be some new build thing. It's saving something, and that message in of itself is important for this younger generation to hear. It's irreplaceable. And, by the way, the building's wonderful, but the real power is actually what's going to happen inside of it with the TRICA teachers in front of a group of children and the approach and the method that we use for teaching them. Come watch a TRICA class sometime. It's pretty profound. Come down here and I'll give you a tour of the